Some betrayals don't announce themselves. They don't come with a warning or a raised voice or even the decency of an argument. Mine arrived on a Wednesday morning in the form of a text message from my own son, sent at 7:52 a.m. while I was standing at the kitchen counter in my robe, waiting for the coffee to finish. Dad, we need to talk today. About the shop. Derek and I have made some decisions, and we need your signature on some documents by end of week. My name is Frank Callahan. I'm 67 years old, retired general contractor, and for the last 22 years, the co-owner of Callahan Mercer Properties, a commercial real estate holding company that my late business partner Gil Mercer and I built from a single warehouse lease and a handshake in 1999. Gil passed away 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 41 days from diagnosis to the end. He was the most honest man I ever shared an office with, and I think about him every single day. But this story isn't about Gil. Not entirely. This story is about a building, 2 sons, and 1 document that nobody in my family knew existed. Welcome. Sit down. This one's going to take a minute. The shop, as my son Marcus called it in that text, was what the family had always called Callahan Mercer. It was never just a shop. By the time that Wednesday morning rolled around, the company held interests in 4 commercial properties across the Phoenix metro area, managed 11 tenant relationships, and was sitting on a portfolio that a commercial appraiser had valued at just over $3 million the previous spring. Not tech company money, not Wall Street money, but 3 decades of work, careful decisions, and choosing the right partner money, real money. My older son, Derek, was 43. He had come into the business 6 years ago when I invited him in, believing that bringing family into something you've built is the natural next step. I was wrong about that. Not immediately wrong. Not wrong in a way you could see coming. Wrong the way a foundation goes wrong under a house, slowly, invisibly, until one morning the doors won't close right, and the windows stick, and you realize the whole thing has been shifting for years. Derek had always been smart with numbers and impatient with everything else. His wife, Sandra, had a lifestyle that required a particular income to maintain, and that income had been, in Derek's own words, at a family dinner I'll never forget, not growing fast enough. I had nodded at that dinner and said nothing. I had already been nodding and saying nothing for about 2 years by then. Marcus was 38, my younger son. Quieter, more careful. The kind of man who measures twice and only speaks when he has something worth saying. Marcus had never asked to be involved in the business, which I always respected. He had his own life, a landscaping company he built himself in Scottsdale, a wife named Patty, 2 kids I would walk through fire for. Marcus was not the problem, but Marcus was on that text, and Marcus had signed whatever Derek had put in front of him. That's what told me everything I needed to know before I even poured my first cup of coffee. I texted back, "Come by at noon." Then I picked up the phone and called Donna Vasquez. Donna had been my CPA for 14 years, 62 years old, sharp as any attorney I'd ever worked with, and constitutionally incapable of letting anything slide. I'd once watched her find a $4,200 error in a closing statement that 3 other people had signed off on. She found it in 11 minutes. Donna Vasquez did not miss things. She picked up on the second ring. Frank. Her voice had that tone. The careful one. Not surprised. I was wondering when you were going to call. You've seen something. Something. I've been seeing something for about 6 weeks. I didn't want to bring it to you until I was certain. Tell me. She did. It took about 8 minutes. I listened without interrupting, which is something I learned from Gil, who believed that the most dangerous thing a man could do in a serious conversation was talk before he understood the full picture. When she finished, I said, "Donna, is it what I think it is?" A pause. "They've retained an attorney, Frank, a business transactions lawyer out of Tempe. They've had at least 2 consultations based on the billing address that came through one of the shared accounts. They're looking at the LLC operating agreement, specifically the section about forced buyouts." I set my coffee mug down. "The forced buyout clause requires 2 of the 3 managing members to petition," she continued. "Derek holds his own stake. Marcus is listed as a managing member, even though he's been inactive since you added him to the structure in 2018. So together they have the votes, I said. Together, they have the votes, Donna confirmed. If they invoke the clause, and you refuse to negotiate a price, an independent valuation is ordered, and you get bought out at whatever that number comes back as. You'd have no recourse. I was quiet for a moment. Donna, I said, do they know about the Meridian Street property? Another pause. Different this time. No, she said. No, they don't. Good, I said. Let's keep it that way, for a little longer. I want to stop here and tell you something about what my sons did not know, what neither of them had ever thought to look for. Callahan Mercer Properties, the LLC, held 3 commercial properties. Those 3 properties were what showed up in the operating agreement, in the tax filings, in every document Derek's attorney had been reviewing for 6 weeks. That is what Derek saw when he looked at the business. That is what he built his plan around. What he did not see was that 2 years earlier, on the advice of Donna Vasquez and a Phoenix estate attorney named Robert Cheng, I had created a separate entity, a single asset holding company, Callahan Capital LLC, registered in my name only. Inside Callahan Capital sat one property, 4411 Meridian Street, a 24,000 square foot warehouse and flex office building in a Tempe industrial corridor that Gil and I had quietly acquired in 2017, just 8 months before his diagnosis. Gil had called it our retirement plan. Sitting on a corner lot at the intersection of 2 streets that everybody who knew commercial Phoenix real estate knew were about to become very important. The city had already begun the infrastructure work. The rezoning conversations had already started. I transferred the Meridian Street property out of the LLC and into Callahan Capital 14 months before that Wednesday morning. Legally, cleanly, properly documented. Robert Cheng filed everything correctly. Donna confirmed every number. I told exactly one person, Donna herself. The reason I had never told Derek was simple. When a man shows you who he is slowly, you don't stop watching. You just start preparing. The boys arrived at noon. Derek came in first, the way he always did, already mid-sentence. He had a folder under his arm, and the expression of a man who had decided he was going to be reasonable today, which meant he'd rehearsed being reasonable, which meant underneath it he was anything but. Marcus came in behind him, hands in his pockets, eyes moving around the room in that way he had when he was uncomfortable and trying not to show it. He looked at me and I could see in his face that he already knew the difference between following his brother and being right about something. He just hadn't found the courage yet to name that difference out loud. Dad. Derek set the folder on my kitchen table without being invited to. Thanks for making time. Sit down, I said. We sat. I poured coffee without asking. Old habit. Derek opened the folder. Inside was a document I recognized immediately, not because I'd seen this particular version, but because I knew exactly what it was. 14 pages. Tabs for signatures. The Callahan Mercer LLC operating agreement, with a formal petition for buyout, attached as an addendum. We've had the business looked at, Derek said. His voice was careful, practiced. By a professional, independently. What kind of professional? A valuation firm out of Chandler. They came in at $2.4 million for the full portfolio. 2.4. I picked up my coffee. And your offer to buy me out at that number would be? Your 1/3 stake is $800,000. Derek said it cleanly, like he'd said it in the mirror until it came out without hesitation. We think that's fair, Dad. The business has been running fine. You haven't been as involved the last couple of years. It's a natural transition. Natural. My son used the word natural. Marcus, I said. I didn't look at Derek. This your idea too? Marcus looked at the table. We've been talking about it. That's not what I asked. A breath. Derek brought it up first. But I looked at the numbers and I mean, it's not unreasonable, Dad. I looked at my younger son for a long moment. Did Derek tell you to look at the operating agreement section on forced buyouts? I asked. Marcus glanced at his brother. Just for a second. That was enough. If I don't agree to your valuation, I said to Derek, you invoke the forced buyout clause, which requires 2 managing members, which is you and Marcus. Derek's jaw shifted slightly. He hadn't expected me to already know the mechanism. People who believe they have a plan always underestimate how much the other person has been watching. We'd rather not go that route, Derek said. This can be simple, Dad. You take the 800,000, you're done. No more managing tenants, no more property headaches, no more liability. You retire completely. I'm already retired, I thought. But I didn't say it. I'll think about it, I said. Derek blinked. The attorney needs an answer by Friday. Your attorney, I said. Not mine. A pause. Friday, Dad. I stood up. That was the end of the meeting. I walked them to the door. Derek went first. Marcus paused on the porch, hand on the railing, and looked back at me. He opened his mouth once, then closed it. There was something in his face that looked like it wanted to be an apology. But it wasn't one yet. Drive safe, I said. He nodded. I closed the door. I stood in my hallway for a moment. Just me and the quiet, and the particular kind of stillness that fills a house after something significant has just happened inside it. Then I went to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and took out a manila folder. Inside was a document with the words Callahan Capital, LLC, Articles of Organization across the top. I read it, even though I had every line memorized. I set it back down. Then I called Robert Cheng. Robert Cheng was 52, third-generation Arizonan, the kind of corporate attorney who never spoke faster than necessary and never used two words where one would do. Gil had called him the most dangerous kind of lawyer, the kind that looks like he's doing nothing until suddenly everything is already done. Frank, he said, I assume this is about the buyout. You heard. Donna called me yesterday. We've been expecting this. He paused. What do you want to do? I sat down at my desk. I want to let it go all the way to the closing table, I said. I want Derek to retain his valuation firm, file his petition, schedule the transaction. I want him to show up in front of a title officer with a check for $800,000 made out to Frank Callahan. Silence on the line. And then? Robert said. And then I want you to explain to everyone in that room what's not included in the transaction they think they're completing. A long pause. Not uncertain. Just the pause of a man constructing the full picture. The Meridian Street property, Robert said. The Meridian Street property. Frank. His voice was measured. Careful. They're going to be walking in there expecting to acquire a 3-property portfolio for $2.4 million. When they find out the anchor asset is not in the LLC, I said. Not part of the transaction. Not theirs. Another pause. Do you know what Meridian appraised at last quarter? Robert asked. I do. Just making sure we're talking about the same number. 1.7 million, I said. Conservatively. The line was quiet for a moment. Frank, Robert said. They're going to walk in thinking they're buying a $2.4 million business. The actual assets they're acquiring in that transaction are worth $700,000. Maybe less without Meridian as the anchor. I know. And your share of $700,000 is about $230,000, I said. Yes. So they're offering you $800,000 for a stake that's actually worth a third of that. They are, I said. Because they didn't know to look for Meridian. Because the Meridian Street property has never been in Callahan Mercer. It has been in Callahan Capital since 14 months ago. And because Derek is very good at reading documents that exist and not very good at asking whether there are documents he hasn't seen yet. Robert made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite an exhale. You knew this was coming, he said. I prepared for the possibility, I said. There's a difference. He picked up his legal pad. I could hear it in the silence. The particular sound of a man who has just decided to enjoy his work. All right, he said. Let's talk about what happens when they open that folder. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning. A commercial transaction suite on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Phoenix. Clean glass and city views. The kind of place where large amounts of money change hands with the specific quiet of people who have done this before. Derek's attorney was a man named Paul Whitfield, mid-40s, efficient. He had the organized confidence of someone who had looked at the documents and believed he understood the full picture. He did not understand the full picture. I arrived 8 minutes early. Donna met me in the lobby. We rode the elevator up without saying much. We didn't need to. The suite had a conference table that seated 10. Derek and Marcus were already seated when I walked in. Derek was in a jacket, the dark gray one I'd seen him wear to every formal occasion for the last 4 years. Marcus was in a dress shirt, collar open, hands on the table, looking like a man who had agreed to be somewhere and was regretting the terms of that agreement. The transaction coordinator, a woman named Brenda Oakes, had the documents organized in 2 neat stacks. Paul Whitfield stood at the head of the table with his folder, already uncapped pen in hand. Derek had a check sitting face down on the table in front of him. $800,000. I could tell by the way he sat next to it, not touching it, but aware of it, that he'd been looking forward to that moment. He saw me walk in, and something in his shoulders relaxed. The same thing Brad Logan's shoulders must have done. The way a man's body releases tension when he believes the final obstacle has shown up to cooperate. Dad. Derek stood, extended his hand. Glad you came. I shook it. I told you I would. Exactly. He smiled. That particular smile. Then we're all good. We sat. Brenda Oakes began her opening remarks. Paul Whitfield settled his papers. And then my phone, face up on the table in front of me, lit up with a text from Robert Chang, parked downstairs. Ready when you are. I looked up. Every eye in the room was somewhere else. Derek was watching Whitfield. Marcus was looking at the document stack. Nobody was watching me. I stood up. Every head turned. Frank? Donna said, playing her role perfectly concerned. Curiosity. I apologize, I said. Even, unhurried. My attorney just arrived. He needs about 90 seconds with your attorney before we proceed. I looked at Whitfield. Paul, he's downstairs. Could you step out? Whitfield blinked. Your attorney? I wasn't aware you had. Robert Chang. You may know him. Phoenix corporate and real estate, been practicing here about 20 years. Something moved across Whitfield's face. A flicker of recognition that shifted quickly into something more cautious. I know the name, Whitfield said carefully. He just needs 90 seconds, I said again. Something he wants to make sure you're aware of before we proceed. Whitfield looked at Derek. Derek looked at me, and for the first time that morning, the easy confidence in his expression developed a hairline crack. Just one, just at the edge. Fine, Whitfield said. He set his pen down and walked out. The room was very quiet. Derek looked at me across the table. Dad, what is this? Sit tight, I said. Marcus said nothing. He was looking at his hands. 4 minutes later, Whitfield came back in. He walked to the head of the table, set his folder down slowly, and did not pick up his pen. He looked at the documents in front of him with the expression of a man who has just been told the house he's standing in is built on someone else's land. Derek. Whitfield's voice was controlled. Professionally controlled, the way a man's voice gets when he's working hard to keep something out of it. I need to speak with you privately for a moment. Derek straightened in his chair. Why? What's the problem? Derek. What is the problem, Paul? Whitfield exhaled. The Meridian Street property. The name landed in the room, and just sat there. I watched my son's face. Derek was a man who processed things quickly. I watched him process this one. I watched him go through the stages. Confusion first, then the beginning of understanding, then the specific kind of stillness that comes over a person when the ground shifts under them, and they're not yet sure how far it's going to drop. What about Meridian Street? He said. His voice was slower now. It's not in the LLC, Whitfield said quietly. It was transferred to a separate entity 14 months ago, Callahan Capital LLC. Sole owner Frank Callahan. It's been recorded at the county recorder's office since then. Properly documented. Clean transfer. Derek turned to look at me. I picked up my coffee and took a sip. Dad, he said. One word. The way a person says a word when it's the only one they can locate. I set the cup down. I looked at my son across that glass conference table in that room with its Phoenix skyline views, and I held his eyes. Do you remember the first time Gil brought me to Meridian Street? I asked. Derek said nothing. 2017, I said. August. That building had been vacant for 2 years. The corridor was half empty. Gil walked me around the perimeter in 107-degree heat, pointing out where the city utility lines were going in. where the rezoning map put the growth boundary, where the traffic was going to shift in 5 years. He was sick already. He didn't know it yet. Or maybe he did and hadn't said so. But he stood on that corner in the August heat, and he told me, "Frank, this is the one. This is the one we hold." Marcus made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound. "Gil died 8 months later," I said. "And I spent the next 3 years doing exactly what he told me to do. Holding it. Watching the corridor develop exactly the way he said it would. Getting it properly appraised." I paused. Robert's appraiser came back at 1.7 million last quarter. Derek had not moved. 1.7, I said again, letting it settle. "The 3 properties you're acquiring in this transaction, the ones your Chandler firm valued at 2.4 million, are worth approximately 700,000 without Meridian as the anchor. Your offer to buy my 1/3 stake at $800,000, I paused, was based on math that was missing its most important number. Whitfield was looking at the far wall. Marcus had both hands flat on the table and was staring at them. Derek pushed back from his chair and stood up. He walked to the window, same as Brad Logan at the Kettner Lake closing. When a man doesn't know what to do with his body, he walks to the window. "You could have told us," he said. His back was to me. "You could have said there was a second entity." "I could have," I said. "You let us retain an attorney. You let us go through the whole process. You let us get all the way to this table. You told me," I said quietly, "that you needed my answer by Friday. Your attorney's deadline, not mine. You came to my house with a folder already prepared and a check already written, and you told me I had until Friday." I let that sit for a moment. A man who is trying to help his father asks first. A man who is trying to move fast before his father looks too closely does not ask first. Derek said nothing. His hand against the window glass was a fist. Not violent, just the way a hand closes when a man is absorbing something that physically hurts. "Sit down, Derek," I said. Gentle. Final. He sat. Robert Chang came in at that point and took the seat next to Donna. He set his briefcase down, opened it with 2 clicks, and placed a single document in the center of the table. He looked at Whitfield. "I assume we're up to speed?" Whitfield nodded. "Once." "Good." Robert folded his hands. "Then I think we can adjourn this today and let everyone recalibrate." Whitfield gathered his documents without ceremony, shook Robert's hand with the tight-jawed courtesy of a man who knows he missed something he should have caught, and left. Brenda Oakes had her stacks repacked in under 4 minutes. The check. Derek's check sat on the table untouched. Then it was just us. Robert looked at me. I gave him a small nod. He excused himself to the hallway and pulled the door closed behind him with the specific, quiet click of a man who understands when a room needs to be private. Derek was still at the table. Marcus had not moved. I waited. "So that's it," Derek said. Same words. Same hollow tone. The voice of a man who came in holding all the cards and has just been shown a deck he didn't know existed. "That's not quite it," I said. "There are some things I want to say. To both of you. And I need you to just listen." Marcus nodded immediately. Derek, after a moment, looked up and nodded once. "Good. I built Callahan Mercer with Gil Mercer over 22 years, I said. Gil and I shook hands on our first deal in a parking lot in Mesa in 1999. We had $12,000 between us and a lease that needed a tenant. We found the tenant in 11 days. That's how it started. That's what you were planning to take a forced buyout vote on. I kept my voice even. Not cold. Even. Derek, I invited you into this business because I believed in you. I believed you had the patience for it. Commercial real estate is a long game. It rewards people who hold things and punishes people who rush. I looked at him steadily. Somewhere in the last few years, you stopped being patient. Derek's jaw worked. He said nothing. The Meridian Street property is appraised at 1.7 million, I continued. The 3-property portfolio you were acquiring is worth somewhere between 650 and 700,000 on a good day without Meridian as the anchor. You were going to pay me 800,000 for a stake in $700,000 of assets. You were going to overpay for something you thought was worth 3 times what it actually is. I paused. The math was always wrong. You just didn't know which number was missing. Marcus made a sound. Something low. The sound of a man running arithmetic he doesn't like the result of. Marcus, I said. I turned to my younger son. I know you didn't start this. He looked up. I know Derek came to you with something already decided, and you signed on because Derek makes disagreement feel like a personal betrayal. You always have, since you were boys. I leaned forward slightly. But you're 38 years old, son. You have your own company. You built it yourself. You know what it means to work for something slowly. I held his eyes. You knew this wasn't right. I could hear it in your voice on the porch. And you did it anyway. That matters. I know, Marcus said quietly. Dad, I know. Good. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a folded document on the table between us. I left it folded. Both of them looked at it. I spent yesterday morning with Robert, I said. We made some changes to the Callahan capital structure. Changes I've been thinking about for a while, and that recent events made me decide to formalize. Derek's eyes came up slowly. The Meridian Street property, I said, is held inside Callahan Capital. I have relocated the succession designation on that entity. When I'm gone, Meridian Street does not transfer to either of you. The air went out of the room. Not all at once. Slowly. The way a room changes temperature when someone opens a window onto a cold morning. It transfers, I said, to the Gil Mercer Foundation. I unfolded the document and slid it to the center of the table. Gil's daughter started it 4 years ago. They fund trade apprenticeship programs for kids who can't afford traditional college. Electrical, plumbing, HVAC, general contracting. The kind of trades Gil and I both came up through before we ever touched a lease agreement. I smoothed the document flat. When I'm gone, they get the building. The rental income runs the foundation. Gil's name stays on the work he actually did in this world. Marcus put his face in his hands. Derek stood up, walked to the window again, stood there with his back to me, looking out at Phoenix in the morning light. A foundation, he said. Flat. A foundation, I confirmed. He turned around. And I want to be careful here about what I say next, because what I saw on my son's face in that moment was not the frustrated anger of a man who'd been outmaneuvered. It was older than that. Rawer. It was the face of a man who has seen a mirror he was not prepared for. Dad, he said. I thought. He stopped. Started again. Sandra and I, we've been under a lot of pressure. Financially. The last 2 years have been... Derek. My voice was quiet. I understand that you're under pressure. I understand that money has been tight, and that you felt like the business was the logical place to relieve that pressure. I looked at him steadily. But you did not come to me and say, Dad, I'm struggling. Can we talk about the business? You retained an attorney. You had the operating agreement reviewed for a mechanism to force me out. You came to my house with documents already prepared. I paused. A son who needs help, asks his father. That's not what happened here. His throat worked. The Callahan Mercer portfolio. I said, the 3 properties, Derek. Your stake remains intact. I'm not changing the LLC structure. I'm not removing your interest. You still own what you owned when you walked in here this morning. He looked up. What you don't own, I said, is Meridian Street. Because Meridian Street was never in the LLC. And now that we've all established that clearly, we can proceed from an honest foundation. I looked at him. Good. Which is more than we had yesterday. I turned to Marcus. Marcus, same applies. Your stake in Callahan Mercer is unchanged. I'd suggest the 2 of you have a conversation with a business advisor, separately from each other, about what your actual interests are worth and what a realistic future for that portfolio looks like. I kept my voice level, and I'd suggest that conversation happen between professionals, not between brothers in a kitchen before the other party knows it's happening. Marcus nodded. His eyes were wet. Tim Callahan, the younger one, had always felt things before he understood them. That was never his worst quality. Is there anything left? Derek asked. And he meant it the way a son means it, not an heir. I looked at my oldest boy, 43 years old in his gray jacket with his check still sitting face down on the table in front of him. For a second, just a second, he wasn't 43. He was 11 years old, with paint on his jeans and sawdust in his hair, standing in the doorway of the first investment property Gil and I ever flipped, asking me if we were going to keep this one. Lord, what time does to people. What fear of being left out does to men who were once just boys asking their father questions. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I laughed. Not big, not cruel. The quiet laugh that starts somewhere deep and comes out slow. The kind of laugh that Gil used to say meant I'd already thought 8 moves ahead and wasn't worried about any of them. Derek recognized it. His eyes changed. Good. He should have been paying attention. Derek, I said. Meridian Street appraised at 1.7 million. He waited. Howard. He waited. When I'm gone, the Gil Mercer Foundation gets the building and the income it generates. That's done, and it's not changing. I paused. But the foundation's charter permits a named advisory board. I've asked Robert to draft the language. The advisory board has no operational authority. It has a title, a quarterly meeting, and a stipend for board members who actively participate in the apprenticeship program. I let that sit. I'd like both of you on it. If you're interested in doing something with Gil's name on it that actually helps somebody. Marcus made a sound, a different sound than before. The kind that comes out when something unexpected arrives in a room that's been heavy for too long. Derek was very still. You'd still put us on it, he said slowly. I'm your father, I said. Not your enemy. There's a difference. He sat back down. Not all at once. The way a man sits when something has gone out of his legs. The Mercer Foundation Board, I said, looking at both of them, meets 4 times a year. They tour the apprenticeship sites. They hear from the kids in the programs. They vote on grant allocations. I folded my hands on the table. It's not $800,000. It's not a forced buyout. It's your last name on something worth keeping. I paused. Your grandfather was a plumber. I was a frameworker before I was anything else. Gil ran wire in commercial buildings for 6 years before he ever signed a lease. I looked at Derek directly. You grew up watching men work with their hands, and you forgot that's where all of this came from. Maybe this is a way to remember. The room was quiet. Outside the 14th floor windows, Phoenix was doing what Phoenix does in October. Bright and flat and relentless. A city that doesn't do soft light until the very end of the day. Derek picked up the check from the table. He looked at it for a moment. Then he folded it once and put it in his jacket pocket. No ceremony. No speech. The specific quiet of a man putting something away that he is not proud of having brought out. Robert knocked twice before coming back in. He looked around the room, reading it the way a man reads a room when he's been in as many of them as Robert Cheng has. He looked at me and gave a small nod. I buttoned my jacket. Talk to your wives, I said. Both of you. Talk to them honestly about today, about what happened and why, and about what you want the next chapter to actually look like. I looked at Derek. Sandra is going to need to hear it from you directly. Not a version of it. The actual thing. I held his eyes. I won't interfere in your marriage, but I won't pretend I don't know that a conversation is owed. Derek said nothing. That was its own answer. You're still my sons, I said. I stood up, buttoned my jacket fully. Both of you. That's not a lease. It's not an operating agreement. Nobody can petition a vote on it or retain an attorney to restructure it. I looked at them both, one last time at the table. But it has to be earned back. Same as anything worth holding. Marcus stood. He crossed the room and put his hand out. I shook it. And then he pulled me in. Briefly. The way the younger one always did. The one who felt things first. I'm sorry, Dad, he said quietly, right next to my ear. I patted his shoulder twice. I know you are, I said. Derek stood at the window. He didn't cross the room. But when I walked past him toward the door, he said, Dad. Just the one word. Low. I stopped. I didn't turn around fully. Just half. Just enough. I forgot where it came from, he said. I looked at him for a moment. I know, I said. Now you remember. Robert was waiting in the hallway. We rode the elevator down together, in the specific silence of 2 men who have been in a room where something difficult was done correctly. In the lobby, he shook my hand. How do you feel? He asked. Like I'd like to go see a building, I said. He smiled. Drive safe, Frank. I drove east out of downtown, past the interchange where the 10 meets the 202, past the industrial stretch where the new mixed-use development was going vertical on what used to be empty lots, and turned south on Meridian Street. I pulled into the lot at 4411 and parked where I always parked, on the south end, near the corner where Gil had stood in the August heat 8 years ago, pointing at utility easements and telling me about the future. I got out of the truck and stood there. October in Phoenix, warm enough for shirt sleeves. The kind of afternoon light Gil always called the good light, the hour before it goes flat and gold. The building looked exactly like it always looked. Concrete and glass, and 43,000 square feet of quiet, patient value. The kind of thing a man builds slowly and holds carefully and does not sell when someone rushes him with a deadline. I stood there for a while. No phone, no folder, just the building and the light and the particular silence of a place that knows it's being held. Gil, I thought, you would have had something to say about all of this. You would have shaken your head at Derek and made some dry comment about how fast people forget where money actually comes from. And then you would have walked the perimeter one more time just to make sure everything was the way you left it. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the appraisal summary. 1 page, 1 number at the bottom. $1.7 million for a building 2 men bought for $400,000 in the August heat of a year when one of them didn't know he was already running out of time. I folded it back up and put it away. We held it, Gil, I said out loud. Exactly like you said. The Meridian Street building held its ground the way it always had. Solid, unhurried, exactly where we left it. The Callahan Mercer, LLC, continues operating. Derek and Marcus retain their interests. A new property manager was brought on 6 weeks after the closing that wasn't. Things are professionally cordial. They will become more than that, eventually. I believe that. Marcus called me the following Sunday. Not about business, about Thanksgiving, about whether I wanted to come to Scottsdale or whether they should come to me. We talked for 40 minutes. About his kids, about a drainage issue in his backyard, about absolutely nothing that had anything to do with an operating agreement. That was everything. Derek called Raymond 2 weeks later. Not Robert, his own attorney. He and Sandra are working with a financial advisor now, separately from me, on their own terms. That is exactly what a 43-year-old man should be doing. And the fact that it took this to start it is between him and his own conscience. Paul Whitfield filed a self-correction notice with his own firm regarding the due diligence process on the original transaction. I did not ask him to do that. Professional integrity sometimes arrives late, but it does arrive. The Gil Mercer Foundation Advisory Board has 2 new members as of this past January. Derek attended the first site visit, a training facility in South Phoenix where 16 kids were learning commercial electrical work. He came back and called me that evening to tell me about a kid named Jordan, 17 years old, who already had the best wire gauge instinct his instructor had ever seen in a first-year apprentice. That's the thing about putting your name on something real. It changes what you see when you look at it. The building at 4411 Meridian Street remains exactly where it has always been, on a corner, facing the future that Gil pointed at in the August heat of 2017, inside a company that nobody can force a vote on. When I'm gone, it will keep doing what we built it to do, and Gil Mercer's name will be on the work, the way it always should have been. That's all any of us are really trying to leave behind. Something that lasts. Something that meant what we said it meant. If this story stayed with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every one. I'll see you on the next one.